1:30, so we will call to order this meeting of the Marathon County Public Safety Committee, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next we will move on to item 3, which is public comment. Do we have anybody registered for public comment? Nobody is registered. Move on to the minutes from August 6, 2024, the Public Safety Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes as presented? Motion by Wilhelm, second by Mask. All those in favor? Aye. Aye as well. Item 5 is policy issues, discussion and potential committee determination. Item A, discussion regarding 2025 annual budget development and policy recommendations from the committee, including review of the mandatory discretionary program documents and discussion of rates and fees. Item 1, consideration of the direct administration to continue funding of the victim witness specialist position in the district attorney's office using American Rescue Plan Act funds and the 2025 budget. I'll turn it over to the administrator to give us an overview of the request.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So as everyone knows, we are deep into budget season, that wonderful time of year. So just a little bit of background on this item. The justice system, as all of you know, is kind of it has a blended funding stream. So many things are state responsibility and other things fall under the purview of the county. The DA's office is a great example of that. Prosecutors within that office are state funded. Office staff are county funded, and specifically the victim witness staff within that office are really split. They have a county funded component, but also state funding that flows from Chapter 950 of the Wisconsin statute. So in 2023, there was a request for a new position, a victim witness position, as part of the annual budget. Ultimately, I recommended it and the board approved funding that with American Rescue Plan Act funds. The position was particularly useful in my estimation at the time because the state was providing funding for, state was providing funding for a prosecutor position using American Rescue Plan Act funds that was going to go through the end, I believe, of this year. So the victim witness position would support that prosecutor. Now, again, the funding that was proposed through the county budget in 24 and I should say in 23 and 24 was using American Rescue Plan Act funds. Good news, the state ADA position that was originally set to sunset at the end of this year, my understanding, and DA Whetstone can correct me if I'm wrong, but now that position is going through July of 25, so that's a good thing. Similarly, then I would ask that the county board continue, I think it's a prudent use of funds, to continue using American Rescue Plan Act funds for the victim witness position, the limited term position through 2025. And in addition to the fact that the state has continued that limited term ARPA position for a prosecutor position, DA Whetstone, and this really relates to item 6A1 on your agenda, has also put in a request through the state biennial budget process to essentially take that limited term, state-funded, ARPA-funded prosecutor position to make that a regularly GPR, or general purpose revenue funded position through the state. So I think a number of reasons kind of really justify continuing that American Rescue Plan Act funds for that victim witness position. A little bit of background on the victim witness position. Again, there's that split. It's gone anywhere between 40 and 60% in our favor or to our detriment throughout the year, or throughout the years, I should say. My expectation based on conversations with DA Whetstone is we'll be at about that 50% rate for that state share of victim witness funding. It also sets us up well if we continue to use that limited term funding through the American Rescue Plan Act to be in a good decision-making process. We'll see what happens with the state biennial budget, which again really relates to item 6A2 on your position. In terms of, on your agenda, in terms of cost for the position, it's approximately somewhere between 45 and 50,000-ish. So you certainly have American Rescue Plan Act funds that we'll be discussing at Human Resources, Finance, and Property tomorrow, kind of giving an idea where you are with a balance. But my request through the budget process, I think it's prudent to use those funds, even though I had written in the budget that they would end at the end of this year. I think it's prudent to continue to encumber them at least through 25.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions from the committee for the administrator? All right, the DA is here as well. Yep, Supervisor Sandelsky.
Is this in relation to the annual budget stuff too, or is this just for the position in that?
I'll defer to the administrator, but I think we're just directing to continue with ARPA funding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it would be
that's-
through the budget process, the generation of the budget for 2025, the county budget. This is the agenda is drafted, and again, a way for you to have those budget conversations. The reason I'm seeking specific guidance from you is you're the committee of oversight for the district attorney's office. The plan for this limited term funding was just to go through the end of 24, but for all the reasons I referenced, I think it makes good sense to continue it through 25.
Thank you. So this ain't like our overall budget stuff in relation to this, or this is not related to the position, I'm saying.
I'm not sure I understand the question. You can have any conversations you want about the budget underneath that item. I'm just asking for specific guidance with respect to whether you want me to build the 2025 budget with continued funding for that victim witness specialist using the American Rescue Plan Act or not.
Okay. Oh, like in relation to like the drug court and alcohol court is what I was. Would that be under this or no? No.
You can have any conversations relative to the budget in any direction you want to
Okay.
provide me
Yeah,
relative to that.
that's what I wanted to look into more is that because the last we had in the last session we had a conversation about back in January. The district attorney gave us she gave us a presentation about the drug court and the alcohol court, and I think we need to look into that into our budget whether or not we should continue the funding with that.
You can certainly have those conversations as part of this item. I do also know on your agenda, item 7C is talking a little bit about a data collection and performance measure update on treatment courts. I think that's getting to your, or at least allowing a little bit of information on that. But this item is broad reaching. If you want to have conversations to provide direction to county administration about certain programs, feel free to do that. Other committees have done similar things with expansion of programs or continuing funding. For example, nonprofits. You took up the nonprofits as part of one of your budget conversations. That's going to be going to the full county board at your meeting this month.
And I think as part of the budget discussions, when we get the budget at the county board, there'll be perhaps a number of things ARPA funded, and it'll be an opportunity for us to decide where we think the best use of ARPA dollars are. This is just a direction to the administrator to include it in the budget for our consideration. It doesn't mean it's going to actually happen when it comes time to pass the budget. So it's an opportunity, I guess, to put all of our eggs in the basket. Supervisor Mask.
Does this have to be referred to any other committee or just a motion for the administrator?
I think this is just a policy directive. HR, Property, and Finance would also consider whether to include it in the budget. Is that correct?
I think to your earlier point, it's direction to me to include it in the budget, but you're going to have at the full board the full opportunity to make modifications, but also as would HR, Finance, and Property after I deliver the budget to that standing committee in connection with your rules.
So the motion it would just be to direct you to include
Correct.
it in the budget. I'll make that motion.
We have a motion by Mask. Do we have a second? Second by Hoppe. Any further discussion on the item? Supervisor Hoppe.
I just have one. How long do we have ARPA funds for? I was under the understanding they were done at the end of 2024 and the unused funds had to go back to the government.
The funds have to be encumbered by the end of 2024. They can be spent pursuant to existing rules through the end of 2026. Again, the request at this point, as I understand it, I think if we get through the end of 25, because that state-funded position, we'll know a lot more in July of 2025, kind of how the state budget is going to shake out, which I think we'll talk about, and maybe DA Whetstone can elaborate on her request under 6A1. But the short answer is the direction you would provide today would be sufficient to encumber those funds because you'd adopt the budget in November.
Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of directing staff to include this in the budget using ARPA funds, all those in favor say aye. Aye as well. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and the motion carries and it is unanimous. We will move on to item 6A1, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. Item A, discussion and possible action by public safety, and item 1 is consideration to direct administration to author a letter of support to state elected officials for the creation of a assistant district attorney position in the 2025-27 biennial state budget. Teresa, would you, district attorney, like to comment on this?
Hello. So I did put in a request to the state budget to have an additional assistant district attorney position. So as has been discussed already, we have a what I'll call ARPA funded, COVID relief funded position in our office right now as an assistant district attorney. We have been fortunate enough, we originally started with 2. We were authorized for 2 in our office. At some point in time, we were not able to fill the second. We just weren't having applicants. So when it became time to renew that position or extend that position, we only have 1 extended, and that's because we have been able to fill that 1 position pretty much continuously through the offering of it. It's been extremely helpful in our office. What I would like, we have, I'm thinking 38, 39 people in our office right now. It would be wonderful to have a deputy district attorney, so we have the elected district attorney, and then the only other attorney administrator underneath is the deputy district attorney who currently carries a full caseload. So it would be very nice to have the deputy district attorney be truly a deputy district attorney, and then have the current assignment of 6 branches of court, 2 attorneys, one that does sensitive crimes, the other does OWI and felony drug offenses, and then they all do miscellaneous crimes as well. But for the functioning of the courts, that would be a very good state for us to be in. We have done very good work with that additional position, contributing to that. Our case processing is going very efficiently, and our case numbers are down. It allows us to consider things for diversion. It allows us to confer with victims, have more time to do that, all kinds of things, as you all have heard over the years me say. It's amazing that I'm in this position right before I am almost done being the district attorney, because I remember coming to some of you years ago asking for additional prosecutors, and now we're in a very different position, and I'm very grateful for it. What I'll tell you is the county support is very important. That victim witness position, it shows that our county is supporting the district attorney's office and sufficient resourcing to our district attorney's office for what the county actually does resource, which is in part victim witness staff. What the governor will also be looking at, does the county support this additional prosecutor position? And right in our request, it asks if we have a letter of support from our county administrator or from our county board chair or a resolution. And if some of you have been around long enough, you recall that there were resolutions of that sort done in the past. The timing of the extension of the prosecutor position for COVID funds is important because that extension goes through the end of July. As I see it, that allows the governor to consider making that position permanent with a little bit of a buffer from the state budget process, even if it doesn't go timely. If it were approved by the governor, it would be seamless from that position being full as an ARPA position to going into a full-time position. I don't think that's by accident, and I don't think it's coincidental. So I think it shows there's some very good hope that we will be strongly considered for that position to be state funded, that prosecutor position. But I think it's really important that that county support be there and it be visible as they're considering that at the state level.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for the district attorney or staff?
If I can just elaborate, I think to DA Whetstone's point, just a quick primer on the state budget cycle. You're going to have agency requests, which DA Whetstone is in the packet, the agency request that she made of the Department of Administration, which is going to make its way to the governor. Those have to come in, as I understand it, in about November. So Teresa and her team are well kind of ahead of schedule there. DOA will compile and submit its request. The governor then develops the budget, which is released in January or February. To Teresa's point, DA Whetstone's point, the budget really, the target for adoption is generally speaking in July. So there is that opportunity for that kind of seamless transition. The other thing I'll say about the state budget process from the perspective of counties is that as I see it for the Wisconsin Counties Association, it's highly likely that justice system funding is going to be the top priority of the Wisconsin Counties Association. I've served on a work group for the Counties Association on justice system funding over the last, I don't know if it's been quite a year, but it feels like it. And we just kind of adopted what our recommendation is to the Counties Association for consideration, really to address that shortfall of funding. Right now, the split between that I referred to before between county and state is not equitable. Counties fund the vast majority of the costs for operation of the state court system. So the request is to essentially make that 50-50. Why I think that is important, just for the same reasons that DA Whetstone referenced, the timing aligning with the budget for the transition, potential transition of that LTE, limited term employee, ARPA funded state prosecutor position. Likewise, the timing works out very well to see what the impact, the fiscal impact would be of any changes to that split. If I know one of the requests is going to be made that victim witness staff be truly 100% funded by the state of Wisconsin, and that the split for office support and other miscellaneous support for the courts move closer to 50-50. I think that gives us a little bit of that, a little bit more information will be had certainly by July. So again, it aligns well with the budget direction you provided in the last item. But the reason we asked to have this on the agenda is, as DA Whetstone referenced, if you want to take a position just to have me draft a letter of support, I will certainly do that. If, however, you wanted to take the position that, you want the county board to pass some resolution, which you had done in the past in connection with adoption of the Justice Coalition budget recommendations. And just to refresh you on that, Justice Coalition is generally speaking the courts, the state public defenders, and the state prosecutors, as well as the Department of Justice. They came forward with kind of a global package, and the county board adopted a resolution calling for adoption of those recommendations. But we wanted to give you all the options. So if you want me to draft a letter, provide that direction. If you want to have a draft resolution prepared for this body to consider at a future meeting, you certainly, I think, have time, unless DA Whetstone, you feel differently. I mean, I think if the agency requests come in November, the governor's budget's going to be released sometime in January. I mean, if we did it next month, So I can certainly draft a letter if that's kind of the direction of the board. And I would say that, my perspective, if you want it, is that I think the county should stand ready to fulfill its obligations under existing state statutes relative to support of the district attorney's office.
I get my preference would be just so it would make a stronger statement. It would be a county board resolution, but given the timing that we're under, if it has to come out of this committee in October, and then that's kind of pushing it down the road. I mean, I'm happy to do the letter and a resolution.
I believe we could draft, if this direction from this committee is to prepare a resolution for county board to consider at your September meeting, I think we can accomplish that.
That would be my preference. Any other input from the committee?
I would also say a resolution if we can, if it gives it more, I guess, weight, yeah.
Supervisor Mask?
I agree. We should do both. I think
Okay.
the more cages we rattle, the better we get seen.
I think we should do one or the other. I just wouldn't want, my anticipation is this is going to get broad support from the county board, but I'd hate to first have the administrator draft a letter and turn out the county board didn't want to go forward with a resolution. So, but I think a resolution sends a strong message. You get the full support of the county board then, and I suspected there'd be quite a bit of support. So, any other discussion? Supervisor Sandelsky?
So this position's funded through the state. So if the state, as long as the state approves it, then it's funded. I mean, if the state don't approve it, then it doesn't just happen, or what, is that? You get what I'm saying?
Sure.
So this goes down to the state, and then the state's got to pass it.
Correct. So the request from DA Whetstone, which is in your packet, I believe, beginning on page 3, is to essentially create a new position, transitioning an existing limited term employee that has been funded by the state of Wisconsin, an assistant district attorney that's been funded with American Rescue Plan Act dollars, to a general funded GPR, general purpose revenue funded prosecutor position. However, the flip side of that is that the county does have that obligation to ensure that the district attorney's office is properly staffed. So as alluded to in the packet, that would come with, I'm sure, a request for additional office support, which is actually in the, let me just find the page. A projected increase of a victim witness specialist and a legal assistant. So the county would have to evaluate what does that support look like. That's why I referenced the fact that the counties association is really pushing justice system funding as a budget priority for the state budget, because hopefully the county's respective share of supporting the justice system generally will be better shared with the state. So complicated answer to your question of yes, the prosecutor is a state-funded position under the current system, but the office staff, which would necessarily flow from it, would be a county obligation.
Yeah, Teresa.
I just wanted to say that if the resolution is the preferred method of support, which I think is wonderful, I would, if I have a time frame, I would convey that to the Department of Administration, and so that they would know, not that the resolution will be passed, but the date it would be considered, and so that they would know that that support is being discussed and when they would have an answer. And I think that would go a long way with them.
And I think Corp Counsel and Lance, you can have that on the September County Board for adoption consideration. So the September voting meeting, Teresa, would be, yep. Any further discussion?
I just got one more.
Yes, sir.
So you're saying, I just got to clear this up. So the assistant district attorney position, that's funded through the state then?
Correct.
Okay. I just had to make sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so if there's no other discussion, what we're looking for, I think, based on the comments, is a motion to direct staff to author a resolution for consideration by the county board at the September meeting. Motion by Supervisor Mass, second by Supervisor Sandelsky. And again, this is a motion to direct staff to author a resolution in support of the request. All those in favor? Aye as well.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries and is unanimous. I'm going to back up for just a second to item 5A. Supervisor Robinson, did you want to discuss issue regarding crisis management relative to the budget?
Thank you, Chair Jacobson. I've been here in the past to advocate for expansion of the Crisis Assessment Response Team. The Crisis Assessment Response Team is where North Central Healthcare Center's Crisis Center works jointly with law enforcement, both at the county level and at the city level, to provide services. And typically what happens is people call 911, dispatch sends out the officer, and in many cases the problems are mental health crisis and other drug-related activities. And this program has been a very valuable program in trying to address the needs of the residents who are being responded to. But currently the program is an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday service, and crisis demands are not 8 to 5. They're 24 hours a day, but in 7 days a week. What we'd like to do is have the county continue to evaluate options through North Central Healthcare and the sheriffs and police departments to expand those services to a second shift, to try to address more or additional needs in the community and expand into the weekends. And while there's not a formal proposal, I would encourage you to look at it. I know that the sheriff and others have been looking at other funding sources, but I think it's a critical need. When you started to look at who was in the jail and who was interfacing with the crisis center at the healthcare center, there were a lot of the people on both lists. And I think it shows that there's a need for us to try to deal with those in the community, to keep them out of the jail and support those services. And one of the components for a later discussion would be to provide follow-up services once people are discharged from either the crisis center or the jail. But I would encourage you to consider expanding the Crisis Assessment Response Team, or CART, program beyond its current one shift into evenings and weekends.
Wilhelm.
What would the salary do you know what the salary would be for this individual if we hired somebody on second shift? What our cost would be?
We've had a number of discussions, and Sheriff Billup has been there. I don't have a firm number. We'll try to get that at the next meeting. But there's some thought that a portion of these services may be covered under other funding sources, although not a high level. But it's something that came out of the Wausau Policing Task Force. It's something that the police chief, the former and current police chief for Wausau have supported. I know the Sheriff's Department has supported expansion of the services. It's just a need. We'll get you numbers at the next meeting.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think that the specific answer to that question really depends on how you structure that expansion. For example, as HR Finance and Property Committee Chair Robinson referenced, our current system is really a partnership, a three-legged stool between the Sheriff's Office, which is funded by county levy, North Central Healthcare, which is funded by county levy, and then the City of Wausau, which their police department budget funds the City of Wausau specific side of that partnership. So Crisis Assessment Response Team, again, is essentially, think about a squad, a car with a law enforcement professional, trained law enforcement professional with specialized skills relative to mental health and de-escalation, and then a crisis professional from North Central. So essentially, of those 4 positions that I just referred to, 1 City of Wausau law enforcement, 1 county law enforcement, and 2 North Central, the county really funds 3 of the 4. So if the expansion of the Crisis Assessment Response Team is envisioned to be something that is expanding, let's just say adding a shift that covers the county as a whole, the county's funding 100% of that. The converse of that is if it's some form of service expansion where, perhaps another major metro, one of the municipalities within the metropolitan area says, hey, we want to have a crisis professional paired with one of our law enforcement, the county responsibility would be half. If it's in the city of Wausau and it's an expansion, again, the county's responsibility would be half, just the north central side. But so it really depends on how that would be structured. To answer your question about what does the cost look like, all that said, we can easily get the information on what is a crisis professional, what's the cost for that, and what the county's cost for a deputy would be, although we're currently doing deputy negotiations as well, so that's likely to change a little bit on the margins. Hope that answers the question, but we can bring you back something next time.
So if one of the municipalities, for instance, let's say Weston wants to kick in half and we fund half, is that crisis response person just going to respond to incidents in Weston?
I think the sheriff's office can answer kind of how it works, but right now, as I understand, they all kind of, there's the ability for the Wausau officer to respond to areas outside the county, and certainly the county staff respond in the metro.
The way the partnership works right now with Wausau Police Department is they, in essence, lead the program, run the program, manage the program. We assign a deputy over there to them, much like they do investigators in our narcotics task force. It's kind of the same model, with the understanding that if there's a call somewhere in the county, Cronenwetter, Mosinee, the city officer or the county deputy can leave the city to go handle that complaint. So they're not just in the city of Wausau. Under the model that Supervisor Robinson is talking about, we're trying to identify what the best means is to deliver a service after those normal business hours. Right now, for as long as I've been working in the county, North Central Healthcare has had mobile crisis. But mobile crisis only is able to go mobile if they have staff. So one model that we've considered is, do we maybe consider contracting a crisis worker that would be stationed, I think it's kind of what the administrator is saying, at Wausau Police Department, that would be dedicated to that service, that could go anywhere in the county. So it might be to Athens, it might be to Mosinee, it might be to Wausau. But that's something that we need to flesh out yet. So then your cost there is the cost of a crisis worker. If more what we're looking for is a countywide dual responder approach, then you've got the cost of an officer and a crisis worker. So it really depends upon the model that's brought forward and how we best want to deliver that service. If Mountain Bay, who serves Weston and Schofield and so forth, and Rothschild, came forward and said, we want to create our own CART team, much like Wausau and Marathon County have, that would be a completely different conversation to have about how they would want to deliver that service. And then how does that get funded through North Central Healthcare? I think that changes the dynamic a little bit in how the business is delivered.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think just my thoughts is that sounds like there's a bunch of different options being kicked around, and if it's going to be brought to the county board for consideration in the budget this year, I think I would certainly like at Public Safety to see what the proposed model is, so we can offer our input on it. Supervisor Robinson. So hopefully we can see something at the next meeting if that's possible. So thank you. Any other discussion on the crisis response? Supervisor Marash.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious if we've had any successful or more successful recruitment efforts at North Central Healthcare in their crisis or just mental health in general, because when we spoke about this in the past, the big stumbling block was being able to hire people in this area in general. So I'm all in favor of expanding CART personally, but we need to be able to find the people to do it. So that's my question.
Supervisor Robinson, do you have any input on that? So, okay. Any other comments on the proposal for consideration to consider expanding CART somehow? Supervisor Sandelsky, sorry.
That's it.
Just having a moment.
Yeah, it's just like, as far as like the communities that use it, the more, just my thought on as far as the budgeting it, maybe as far as the communities that use it more, maybe would put more towards it. You get what I'm coming at? Like, maybe some communities might only use it like once a month, and then some communities might use it, 15 times a month or something. Maybe as far as that goes, maybe, I don't know if that'd be too complicated, but you get what I'm getting at?
I do, and I think that between the sheriff and Supervisor Robinson, we're going to get a number of different options that take that into consideration, I believe. Is that a fair statement? Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, well, thank you both for your input, and I'll look forward to learning some more on that as we go forward. We can move on to item 6B. This is discussion and possible action by Public Safety to forward to the County Board for consideration. Item 1, consideration of the creation of a county ordinance consistent with Dane County Ordinance 34.01. And I guess I'll start with Lance, the administrator. Did you have any opening comments on this?
I don't. I think this is something that Clerk Trueblood kind of, in conversations with her colleagues across the state of Wisconsin, there's been a discussion about county ordinance creation, particularly relative to disorderly conduct sort of behavior in connection with elected officials. But it gets at that broader kind of policy question for the county board of how do you want to use your county ordinances and what benefit comes from a county ordinance. So I know Corporation Counsel is here as well, can perhaps shed some light, but really county ordinances and state statutes are inextricably linked in how they're used in county government. So I'm not sure that's going to be overly helpful as you start to think about this, but that is the context. If an individual engages in behavior, they generally are going to find themselves in one of these two systems. So with that background, I don't know, Kim, if you want to tee it up for the committee?
Thank you. Like Lance said, we had some training at our Summer County Clerks Conference in June, and it was basically related to the ongoing and ever increasing issues that election officials, county clerks, municipal clerks, and poll workers have been facing over the last couple of years, as far as harassment, some swatting activity going on, not necessarily in Wisconsin, although there has been some in Wisconsin, but across the country. And as a result of that training, the Dane County clerk shared this ordinance with us that they passed in Dane County a couple years ago that just added a provision to their disorderly conduct ordinance directly addressing disorderly conduct towards election officials. And what it does basically is increase the penalties for that. It looks like Dane County's penalties range anywhere from $10 to $500. And in talking with Mike earlier, our current disorderly conduct ordinance, the penalties range anywhere from $5 to $500. So I'm sure that there's a lot of discretion in there as far as the DA is concerned when they go to charge these cases. So my ask to you as a committee and then to the full board would be to give some discretion or give another tool to our law enforcement when it comes to these cases. If, God forbid, we should have experience with these in Marathon County, where they could be charged at a rate that might prove to be a deterrent to anyone who might think they were going to harass or threaten an election official in any way. And it would just give a little bit more discretion to our law enforcement when it comes to charging those offenses. So I don't know all the ins and outs of the law. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV. So that's why I had asked Mike for some input on this. So Mike, if you've got anything to add to that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. I am a lawyer. I sometimes play one on TV. So I did have a chance to review Dane County's ordinance. We've had discussions about county ordinances relating to public safety before. I think back in 2018, we kind of revamped the county's public safety ordinances. And for those of you who were involved in that, recall that the county can create public peace and good order, that's what the statute calls them, ordinances, but we're restricted to adopting ordinances that are strictly in conformity with state law. And the hook for this disorderly conduct against election officials ordinance is that the state legislature just passed a state law that criminalizes disorderly conduct against election officials. So it does give counties the authority to regulate in this area. We do already have a disorderly conduct ordinance on the books. So we have a county disorderly conduct. It's section 9.21. The Dane County ordinance, if you use that as a model, the underlying crime is the same. It's the exact same crime or forfeiture, disorderly conduct, but it adds what I would term a penalty enhancer. If the disorderly conduct is engaged against an election official, it increases the forfeiture amount. So if this is something that the committee's interested in exploring, in effect what you would be doing is creating a escalated forfeiture amount for a separate disorderly conduct penalty against election officials. I think it would be pretty similar to what Dane County has. We would just have to draft it in a way that's a little bit more consistent with our code because we have our penalties in a different area than Dane County does. As Lance alluded to, there's also the policy discussion of, what offenses do you put in a county code of ordinances and what offenses do you leave to the state for prosecution. If you have someone who commits disorderly conduct against an election official and it rises to the level of a crime, in all likelihood, you're going to want that to be prosecuted as a state misdemeanor and not as a county forfeiture because the penalties for a county forfeiture are monetary only, whereas a state misdemeanor carries probation, jail, other types of penalties. Whether or not you pass an ordinance at the county level, the state law will still take effect when the state law takes effect, and that will still be a tool for prosecutors to use. It's just a question of, does the county want to add another tool to the toolbox of law enforcement related to election officials? Do you think it's necessary, a good idea? And what penalty would you want to impose if you do? So I guess for today, we don't have a draft of what Marathon counties could look like. I think we would need some guidance from the committee as to what penalty level you would be looking at if you elected to go that route.
If I can, sorry to put DA Whetstone on the spot, but I think to Mike's point, if you do want us to bring a draft back, it makes prudent sense to engage the district attorney's office to see if nothing else, to provide the committee and the full board with their office's thoughts on that philosophy that Mike just alluded to. Perfect example. There's a lot of, if you look through the statute books, there's a lot, they're thick, the criminal section's thick. There's a lot of serious conduct that constitutes felonies in the state of Wisconsin. Would it make sense to copy that and put it in ordinance, in county ordinance, to Mike's point, where the penalty is monetary only? I think you can make a pretty logical argument that doesn't add a whole lot of value and just further complicates things because the DA's team, if they review a police report that has serious conduct, they're going to deal with it in an appropriate way. That probably a monetary penalty for something that's a felony doesn't make a lot of sense. But sorry to put you on the spot, Teresa, with if you care to weigh in now, or what do you think a prudent next step might be for the committee?
I think, Mike, you handled it very well. I agree with the administrator that if we would consider, every case is different. Obviously, we look at the particular circumstances, but an election situation where disorderly conduct is occurring against an election official, we would consider to be an aggravating circumstance, generally speaking, that may elevate that to a crime. I do also understand why a county does pass something specifically, because it makes a statement that the county board really is standing behind good order in an election situation, and that the poll workers have something visible that the county has done to support those workers. So whether or not you enact the ordinance doesn't determine. So I guess it really is a policy decision in that regard, but we would just charge it according to the particular circumstances. So.
Okay, any other discussion? I think at this point, as Corp Counsel mentioned, we don't have a proposed Marathon County ordinance in front of us. We just have an example. So what I think we're looking for, if folks are interested in moving forward, is direction to the administrator to bring a draft ordinance back for our further consideration, and he will work with Corp Counsel in the DA's office to get us something to look at. So do committee members have an interest in directing staff to move forward with bringing back a draft ordinance? If so, we'll need a motion to that effect. Motion by Mask. Second by Hoppe. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of directing the administrator to bring a draft ordinance back for our consideration, say aye. Aye. Aye as well. Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. We can move on then to item 7, educational presentations and committee discussion. Item A, medically assisted treatment, grant update, and future opportunities. Can you help me with this one? Thank you.
Chief Deputy Milhausen is going to kick that off and answer any and all questions you might have.
I don't know about that, but I brought the right people with me. So thank you very much for your time, to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee. I'm just going to go back. I have our social worker from the jail, Rhonda Zastro, with me, and jail administrator, Sandra Ledoux, and they definitely will be able to offer some insight into the program. So the MAT program, medically assisted treatment, is something that we were before this committee a year or so ago, well, longer than a year ago, and had expressed interest in wanting to apply for a grant through the Department of Health Services, and we ultimately did that with your approval and guidance, and received $214,000 plus in the last grant term, and that grant was applied for back in May of 23. The program, it took us a while, being it was a new program grant, to get the funding actually delivered to us and be able to put it into work. And there was a remaining balance at the end of this cycle of $160,000 and some change. And we met with Department of Health Services and applied for that to be rolled over into next year, which that has been submitted to do. And we have been encouraged to apply for another grant, the same grant, but another year of the grant funding, up to $400,000. And we have been heavily persuaded to request the full amount. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of what the background is of the program. Rhonda will talk more to that. The program, we're in a position with the program in the facility for opioid-dependent individuals who come into our facility in the jail. And there's a legal basis by which we must continue treatment that they've already started. And that's migrated to that we should screen and offer it to those who are being screened in and are found to need it. So there's this funding, and where we're at right now is the numbers of the people that we screened in this last cycle. Were about 2,250 people were screened that came into our facility. There's a number of different programs, counseling, coaching that all goes along with this, as well as administering medications so that we can hopefully get the people off of the opioid dependence and hand them off once they leave our facility and they can be successful in their recovery. We're hopeful. I will tell you that we did apply for the full $400,000, being this committee had supported the grant prior. The reason it wasn't before you before to get your approval was because it was a short window. We didn't find out about the funding until late August, and it had to be submitted by the 6th, I believe, September 6th. So one of the things that I want to express is that Rhonda obviously has full-time duties as a social worker in the jail. She's been gracious enough to take this on because she's very passionate about it, but she can't devote this amount of time. Like I said, 2,250 people were screened in this cycle. That number's just going to grow. So with the grant, there is funding out of that $400,000 for a position. I would like to hire another social worker to work alongside Rhonda with her social work duties, but primary function be focusing on the medically assisted treatment program. This is a program that is not going to go away from Marathon County. I've had some conversations. Corp Counsel was a part of the meeting with Department of Health Services. He can weigh in here just a little bit about our legal obligation that we must offer this program. It falls under a person's Eighth Amendment right, and there have been a number of Eighth Amendment cases where places are being sued, and successfully, because they're not offering the treatment. So we're obligated to do that. Are we obligated to have a person designated? Well, somebody has to run it. So we can't ask any more of Rhonda. And quite honestly, we don't have anybody else that, I guess I would use the term qualified to do it, or as qualified to do it, and know those connections in the community to hand the inmates off when they leave. So that's kind of where we're at. Is I can't tell you how many years the funding is going to be there. The funding was a part of the opioid settlement dollars that the Department of Health Services got, so from the state side, but that was a small portion. I do know that I believe it is Waukesha County. What their county has elected to do is for ongoing funding for the position to manage the MAT program, is they have utilized their opioid settlement dollars going forward. I know that, I believe that the county has either looked at or has hired a consultant to give some direction on that. My ask would be that maybe this is entertained along those conversations as well, being it's specifically related to opioid treatment. I'm going to open it up to Rhonda or Sandra, either one of them. And then likewise, Mike, if you've got some insight from the legal standpoint.
Wow. You did fantastic. I don't know that I have much more to add to that. It's been an exciting time. That is an optimistic way to describe what has happened. We were running we were running a very bare bones program, which was progressive. And then based on this grant, we were able to build a very successful supportive program around medications for opioid use disorders, so that we are not only offering a medication, we're offering supports to promote recovery. And it is very apparent that this is a growing avenue of recovery. In the last week, 6 new people came into the jail that were on a medication. Those are numbers that continue to grow by leaps and bounds. And so, Chief Deputy said, we have to do this legally. This is an obligation to fulfill. And with these funds, we will be able to make it a very robust and successful program instead of just doing what we have to do. So I appreciate your attention and your support as we move forward.
I can answer questions.
I won't belabor the point too much. Bill did an excellent job. And just a little flavor of the legal landscape. This is an area of litigation that has really exploded amongst local governments facing Eighth Amendment claims from inmates, and particularly relative to providing or not providing medically assisted treatment for opioid use disorder. We're at a point under the law now where if a county elects not to provide that type of treatment, you're going to be liable, and the county is going to be ordered to provide that treatment at a significantly higher cost after litigation. So any proactive steps that we can take to ensure that we're not at such a high risk and to ensure that inmates are receiving what the law has indicated is required, I think it saves the county a load of money. That's a technical term in the long run, because we're not facing such high damages under those suits. Other counties across the country have faced damages under Eighth Amendment suits and have been ordered to provide the type of treatment that we're already providing. As the law evolves, those requirements are going to evolve, and as much as we can stay ahead of the curve, the less exposure we will have from a risk perspective.
Just one question. So right now, Matt is a state grant funded position. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and you've reapplied for increased funding to add the second position, right?
It's not adding a position, it'll just a second position. It'll just be the first position that we've added. We just piggybacked a lot of additional duties onto Rhonda so far, but now we're looking to add a position.
And I completely support it. It's obviously a crisis in Marathon County and beyond. I think my only request going forward is if we can. It's probably hard to collect, but if we can get some more data on the success of, once they're released back, recidivism, are you seeing them come back? Have we had success? Do you have any of that information now?
So I've built in a feedback component to this program. So prior to leaving the institution, they are asked for their feedback voluntarily so we can make the program better. After they've gotten out, I wait a couple of months typically, and I call each of them and ask how it's going, ask about barriers to try to alleviate any of those to make the program better. We still have constant contact with our partners who are administering medication, providing counseling, those types of services. And a few of them have come back into the jail, but they have continued on the medication. So they're not on drugs. They're coming back in, successfully engaged in that program, and we are able to very quickly continue their prescribed medication to get them through the short time they've been incarcerated and then back out into the community to continue being sober. So I know that that is not a concrete data point. That is a subjective response at this point. We started in November and the grant term ran through June. So that wasn't a very long period of time to get up and running and get a lot of data. I've continued to keep every bit of information I can, but I am not an expert in data management, so Michael maybe could help us out with that piece. It will be interesting to see as we continue to run a program like this, how that looks for recidivism and to take into account not just that reincarceration, but what does that look like in context? Are they being arrested for drugs? Are they coming in high on drugs? Are they coming in successfully continuing with the program they were able to start while incarcerated? So I think those are important pieces of the feedback that need to be considered.
And I think that I'm hoping that when we see the report back from the consultant, that this is certainly a consideration in his or her recommendations. Because the only issue with grant-funded positions, especially something as important as this, is that at some point it will become a county responsibility, whether it's adding a district attorney or adding a position here. At some point, we can't always bank on the grant money coming from another source. So I would just encourage, as we go forward, to be proactive in looking at how we can fund that position when it becomes our responsibility.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to piggyback on that, I think the idea that was suggested to evaluate the opioid settlement funds makes complete logical sense. My understanding is that the consultant is wrapping up their work and hope to make a presentation to a joint meeting of Health and Human Services and I believe the Board of Health in October, and then the full board, the full county board as well, kind of about based on their gap analysis. They're not going to make recommendations for what you should fund, but what they're going to do is, as I understand it, report on where they believe the quote unquote gaps are in our continuum of care across our various systems. And I know law enforcement representatives were interviewed as part of that. So certainly an opportunity for the county board to set aside some of those funds for an ongoing response to deliver this program.
Okay, other comments? Supervisor Hoppe.
I just have a question on the funding. Is there any way you can give us just a very general breakdown of what it's used for? I mean, do we pay for the meds? Is it considered housing? Is it, what exactly are the funds used for?
So with our new application to apply for the same type of grant for the $400,000, we did write a set of that money for a position just in case this does get approved. The medications are in that. We have consultant fees with the opioid treatment center in our city who administers our methadone. So the consultant fee covers the methadone fee. On that piece, we offer recovery coaching through a peer support service company where the coaches will come in and meet with individuals. So that's a contracted fee. And then we also have a few groups that are run within the facility that are related to addiction services. That's a consultant fee. There are some various supplies involved. All of the other medications that are not methadone are involved. Well, yes, I can. Medications are much more expensive than I had anticipated. Thank you. Various medical supplies are also included in that, syringes and some like labs, UA cups, things like that. So we have a supply cost, which includes all medications and office supplies, and that's at $121,000. There was some training pieces involved, especially if we do obtain a new person. It would be fantastic for them to go to the state conference run by the Department of Health Services. So we have some training costs involved. That's under $2,000. And then the consultant fees are $173,000. Those are the bulk of those categories. And then the position we just weren't sure, so we chose 100,000.
And I just wanted to say the reason there isn't a position request is I didn't want to blindside you with a position request until we could inform you of the grant, the program, the opportunity. I did look, and if we were to put that as a social worker in the same class as Rhonda, that salary comes in as a class M, which is 58,000 and some change up to 82,000. So we figured probably the lower end of that plus benefits. I think that 100,000 that we projected would certainly be within the bounds.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? This is update only. Supervisor Wilhelm?
So when a person comes in and you give them drugs for treatment, now when they leave here, because we're paying for it when they're in jail, I believe, right? Oh, the grant. So what happens when they go out on the street or out to their normal life?
Medical assistance is not allowed for a person who's incarcerated because it's a government benefit. So when they leave the institution, they are able to reactivate their medical assistance. That will pay for their medication and their counseling.
Any other questions? Supervisor Marash?
There we go. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you, Rhonda, for taking on those additional responsibilities.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you both. And we can move on to item 7B, update on law enforcement services to the village of Rib Mountain.
I'll take this one as well. We, myself, and the sheriff have been before this committee a number of times over the last several years regarding contracted law enforcement services to the village of Rib Mountain. Back when they were a town and now when they're a village, if you guys would recall, last year we added a second deputy to Rib Mountain. They approached us. Myself and the sheriff worked through a contract with them with the review of Corporation Counsel, and they've asked that we increase that coverage to yet a third one, a third Rib Mountain deputy. So that position is set to take place at no cost to the county. They're paying it just like they did the previous two positions. And that position is to take effect beginning October 1 of this year. And basically coming to you just to let you guys know that that's taken place, and that as far as the funding source, it's coming just like it did with the other two prior positions. There's no expense to Marathon County. What we do with this particular contract, though, we rewrote the contract with them because it's growing into a police department, if you will. So we took into consideration when they were a town, we were paying and absorbing the cost of the fuel because our deputies have the take-home car, they're on special teams and things like that. We've now moved into a model where we entered into, I'll call it a monthly stipend, if you will, that they're going to pay for each car, not just this third one, but all three cars for fuel and maintenance. So that's going to be on top of the deputy wages that is already built into it. So that money would come back to the county as a revenue in the sheriff's office fuel budget and our fleet automotive expenses.
Is there any speculation that at some point the village is going to decide to just start its own law enforcement agency? Because then we'd be left with 3 deputies that we'd like to keep here, but then it's going to be our responsibility, right?
Yeah, I don't believe there's any desire for Rib Mountain to start its own police department. Quite honestly, financially, there's no way they could have the service that we're providing for the cost. I don't know if the sheriff wants to. Do you want to give anything more there, Sheriff, or no? Okay. Yeah, I do know that they have thrown out that they would even like to see it grow to a 4th, but we haven't really had any conversations to hammer that out. With this, the hours of coverage and the number of days per week are growing, so they have more coverage in Rib Mountain. And the benefit that we really see from the sheriff's office is, I'll be quite honest with you, that the majority of our calls prior to us having coverage there were in Rib Mountain. Back when we worked the road, we were in Rib Mountain all the time. And so that has really given our other deputies that are on shift at the same time the ability to patrol the rural portions of Marathon County and get those services out to the further reaching areas of the county. Because it doesn't make sense if we had to keep covering this metro area for you to drive 40 miles out just to get a call to come right back. So we all hung pretty tight to the metro area at one time.
And they are able to, I mean, they're dedicated to Rib Mountain, but technically they can scoot out to a call if they're the closest one to the town of Mosinee or the town of Marathon or something like that, right?
Absolutely. And if there's ever an emergency call, wherever that may be, and they're available to go, they'll go. I think 2 of the 3 that are out there are on special teams. And, you know, Rib Mountain has been in agreement that if a call comes in and they need to go, if say they're on SWAT, they need to go to a SWAT call, you know, they can go. We're just make sure that we're trying to backfill the coverage with our regular county deputies.
Any questions, Supervisor Mask?
Rib Mountain's paying for their benefits too, right?
Yes. Yep. The benefits
Thought
and
so.
wages were all factored in there.
I thought so. I just
And they're
wanted to
paying for the
make sure.
car as well.
Thank you.
Ongoing training as well?
We've been just incorporating them in with our 24-hour in-service.
Okay.
That we do.
We get reimbursement from the state for training. It was $160 annually per deputy. It's now $320, I believe, per deputy. So that's reimbursed by the state. But their hours that they work, if they're away from Rib Mountain training, Rib Mountain's paying for that.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, that's also update only, so thank you. We can move on to item 7C, data collection and performance measure update on treatment courts. And we do have Judge O'Neill here, I believe, to comment on that.
Thank you for having me. So it was brought to my attention that I think it was Supervisor Wilhelm had asked for an update on our treatment courts, and Administrator Leonard then asked me to give you guys a brief presentation. I did, if you notice, Laura Yari, our Justice Systems Coordinator, is not here today. She is out of the county today, so you're kind of stuck with me. In preparation for today's presentation, Laura had pulled some numbers from our treatment courts, as well as some numbers from the Department of Corrections and their treatment programs to use as a comparison to evaluate how our programs are doing. And Michael graciously put those into a chart form, which I think it was part of your agenda items. But I guess what I would like to just emphasize is these numbers were put together somewhat hastily. I was just made aware of this about a few days ago. And while I do believe that the numbers accurately reflect the success of our programs, I cannot swear that the methodology that was utilized to come up with these numbers are 100% accurate. So bear with me that we kind of tried to somewhat throw this together for today, but these are some numbers to give you an idea of where we're at. So just to give you a little background for those of you who may have forgotten or not been here in the past, our treatment courts are evidence-based. They're based upon a national standard. About 30 years ago, treatment courts started to build throughout our nation. Today, every state in the nation has treatment courts. 13 other countries have treatment courts. So they are definitely a presence throughout our nation and, quite frankly, becoming international. Our treatment courts were developed with guidance from the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, as well as the Federal Bureau of Federal Bureau of Justice. So we received grant money as well as technical assistance in developing our courts. And again, they are all based upon the national standard. We adopt best practices. We stick with those standards. Each year we go to training to make sure that these courts are developing, the science is changing, and we try to stay up to date with regard to the best science. And because they are science-based, there has been data collected throughout the history of treatment courts. And with the assistance now of Michael as our data officer, we're able to give you some of those numbers a little bit easier. So those of us who have worked within the Marathon County criminal justice system have anecdotally observed the successes of our treatment courts. And I know I was here last year to advocate for that as well. Those who are involved in our courts and in our county have witnessed the transformation of those who are substance dependent individuals who, when they enter the court, really are not functioning. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their families, the only friends they have are friends that they develop through their addiction, friends that they think are friends who are going to provide them with their substance of choice. And they live day to day trying to manage where they're going to get their next fix and try to avoid arrest, incarceration, either in jail or prison. Upon graduation, these individuals are gainfully employed. They've received employment skills. They're now able to pay their bills. They've established a support network, including sober friends. They've generally reconciled with their families, and they leave with the tools to maintain their sobriety and stay out of our jail and our prisons if they utilize those tools for the rest of their lives. So thanks to Michael, again, we do have some of the data set forth in these charts. And with regard to these numbers, I guess what I'll point out is that we utilized, to begin with, when you look at the completion rate comparison, we utilized our Marathon County OWI court completion rates, as well as when you look at the rearrest rates. We've highlighted the OWI court basically because that is our longest existing treatment court. We have the most numbers for those. Those numbers go back to, I believe, well, I think we started that court in 2009. And actually the numbers that you see go back to 2012. And the numbers go through then 2019. The reason that we don't have more recent numbers is we were using the Department of Corrections programs as a measuring stick, and the data has not been published by the Department of Corrections in Wisconsin after 2019, so we don't have more recent figures from those programs. So the comparisons, as you can see, are from 2012 to 2019. Now, in the Department of Corrections, there are several treatment programs. We utilized, at least in the program that we compared ours with is the substance use program. There's also the challenge incarceration program, as well as the earned release program. The substance use program was the one that we selected because, quite frankly, that's the program that the Department of Corrections has the best success with. So those are the highest numbers that the Department of Corrections has. And also they're also similar to our OWI court. So we felt that the best comparison would be their best program compared with our program. So as you look at the completion rate comparison, you will see that the lighter brown color is basically those who were enrolled in the programs. And this chart, I think this completion rate, and Michael, as I understand it, the numbers reflect individuals who are incarcerated getting into all their treatment programs, or is this specific to substance use? So all three programs. And as you can see, approximately a little bit over 50% of eligible individuals actually get into those programs. And then the darker brown indicates their completion rate. And as you can see, the Marathon County OWI Court completion rate is significantly higher than the darker brown colors reflecting the Department of Corrections completion rate. And then we have the smaller chart, which does reflect completion rates for the Marathon County Drug Recovery Court. And as you can see, again, those are significantly higher. Now, the date of that, because our recovery court really began in 2018, really hit the ground running in 2019, our data is 2020 through today's date. And we compared that to 52.8%, which is what we would have anticipated the average Department of Corrections completion date would have been if we had just kind of had this pretend world where DOC actually did the numbers. We took that average of 52.8. And as you can see, our Drug Recovery Court completion rate is, again, higher than the Department of Corrections rate. And then on the next page, with regard to the criminal rearrest rate comparison, I would note that rearrest is an inaccurate title. It really, how we based recidivism, so to speak, is a comparison of charges. So we looked at CCAP, which listed people who were recharged. So we used really people who were charged, not rearrested. You can be arrested without being charged, and you can be charged without being convicted. So we used as our definition, though, those who were charged as with a comparison on CCAP. And it was our understanding that the numbers that are published by the Department of Corrections also are based upon recharge, not necessarily rearrest or conviction. And those charges can range from the simplest charges like operating a motor vehicle without a valid license, quite frankly, up to a Class A felony. So there's no definition specifically as to what they would have been recharged with. But again, as you look at the rates within 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, the Marathon County OWI Court rearrest rate is significantly more favorable than those participating in completing the, and this would be specific to the substance use program at the Department of Corrections. So while, again, these numbers are generally kind of specific to OWI Court, I'd like to see some more numbers run specifically with regard to drug court. I do think that it does indicate that our treatment courts are successful and worthy of continued support. I certainly acknowledge that our treatment courts are not perfect. We recognize that we always have room for improvement. We are always attempting to make our program as evidence-based as possible through continued training as well as continued revision of our policy. Members do remain motivated to work collaboratively to ensure that evidence-based practices remain the foundation of our program. Admittedly, the team members do not always agree. There are disagreements. The treatment court model is successful because it pulls together expertise of various fields so that you do have law enforcement as well as social services at the table, so that you have both perspectives of focusing on public safety as well as treatment and future needs of the personal participant. And so obviously when you get together those various fields of expertise, people are going to have differences of opinions. But the team has worked collaboratively to try to follow the standards set forth in the national model. And we continue to have strong support from all members of the judiciary, as well as the Marathon County Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Billup, the Wausau Police Department. Chief Barnes remains an advocate for continued drug recovery court. The Department of Corrections, the Department of Probation and Parole remains an active participant. The Marathon County Corporation Counsel's Office the Marathon County Social Services Department, Marathon County Justice Programs, as well as area treatment providers, local nonprofits who receive the benefit from community service hours that are performed by our participants, as well as local residents. And I can tell you on more than one occasion, I don't know how people know that I'm involved in drug court, and I guess I didn't tell you guys I'm one of the drug court judges. But people in the community, for some reason, know. And they stop me and they ask me about it, and they always say what they think that it's a great idea. And just one story I'll tell you. Recently, my dad fell. He was in the hospital. He was rehabbing. He's back walking his 5 miles every day. He's great now. But one of the physical therapists said, "Hey, she's the drug court judge." And I was leaving, and everybody at the nursing station had to stop and ask me about it. And they wanted to know a little bit about it. And now, obviously, these are people in the medical field, but they all unanimously agreed that this community needs drug recovery court. And that again, these are hospital people, right? So they're focused on treatment. They're focused on the needs. But what one nurse told me was, and it sticks with me, when is the world going to figure out that substance use disorder is a medical condition that needs treatment instead of incarceration? And I do think that that's what we've realized in treatment courts. And it's a 30-year project that's still in the process of growing. But when you look and you compare simple incarceration with treatment, the results of treatment are always going to be better. And I know it's an expensive project, but in the long run, back in 2008 when we first had this idea and we started looking at the numbers and how overcrowded our jail was, financial backing, it made sense to have treatment courts. So I will also be the first to admit to you that back in 2008, and I was at this training, Sheriff Billup was, a deputy at the time? I don't know, you were. A lieutenant, but I'll never forget the day so the district attorney at the time was Ken Heimerman, and he and I bantered back and forth many a time. I was a criminal defense attorney, so I was all drug court. Well, I have to tell you, after the first 5 minutes, he and I looked at each other and we were like, there is no way this is going to fly. And I was the first to say, this is crazy talk. This is insanity. Because 20 years ago, we all knew, just say no. And if you don't say no, you go to jail. You sober up, and when you get out, you'll be fine because you've sobered up. That was my belief. But 20 years later, I don't know how many hours of treatment court training I've been to. It's just flabbergasting to me how ignorant I was, and I think the community is, because we don't know, we don't understand. And it's so counterintuitive to say, yeah, we're going to give this person who we know is addicted to drugs and should be in jail because they could go to prison for 5 years or whatever, and we're going to give them treatment instead. And I know it doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't. But it's finally made sense to me again after about 15 years of studying this. So having said all that, I just want to let you know that we do have buy-in, certainly from a number of the leaders within our community, for treatment court. Those of us involved in the courts have seen changes. Does everybody succeed? Absolutely not. But the vast majority of them, I believe, certainly their lives are better today for having completed drug court. So again, this was just a quick snapshot of some of the data that we're able to pull together for today to give you a little heads up. I'm more than happy to come back with more data specifically with regard to drug treatment court, as well as answer any of your questions today if I can, or come back even in October if you'd like more information. Questions? Yes.
Okay, so anybody that is affected by somebody that is addicted to drugs, it is a horrible situation. That is agreed. This year I kind of took it upon myself to, if I met somebody from Marathon County or surrounding counties that house Marathon County inmates, I just ask questions about, do you hear anything about drug court? And everybody that I've talked to that works in a jail has expressed to me that they hear it all the time. It's everybody's talking about it. I'm gonna use drug court. I'm gonna use drug court to try to get themselves out of trouble. And so I asked them, what would you consider, do you think we should continue with this, or what, just getting an opinion? And there was quite a few that said no, because they felt that it wasn't working. And I asked some people in the community that are dealing with some situations. And like one guy explained to me that he had a friend that's been going through the drug court, I wouldn't say offended, but got caught 3 times still using drugs. He said the nice thing is it kept him out of jail, but it hasn't really helped him. So are there consequences to actions, like if they're not following through? Because the last thing you want to do is keep giving somebody chance after chance after chance, because if they know there's no consequence, they're going to keep going through it, but they're never going to follow through. Now, that is a concern that I have, is that we're putting people through it, and they're not actually getting something out of it. They might portray that they are to get out of jail. And my concern is, are they really being helped, or would it be better to get them off of drugs for a while? You know, that is a concern to have. I believe that we do need drug court, but I don't want to see people are constantly going in and they get a chance after chance after chance, because, you know, that's what concerns me. And
Sure.
that's what
And I absolutely get it. And I hear you, and I was with you. I was, absolutely. So there is accountability. So that's kind of the core of the court, right, is that there's treatment and there are chances, but there's accountability. So public safety always has to be at our forefront, as well as public health. With regard to the comments in the jail, I think that's somewhat of a misnomer. When inmates are in jail, first of all, they're not being truthful. And I don't know, maybe Rhonda witnesses it on an everyday basis. They like to brag. They like to have their bravado. They like to think that they're tough. And, you know, nobody's going to push them around because they're in jail. So I absolutely take whatever they're saying in jail with a grain of salt. Because it is true that some people believe, I'll just do drug court, right? They have no idea what drug court is. Okay, so if you're given the opportunity of probation or drug court, you're insane if you don't just take probation, unless you really want treatment. Because with probation, you're going to see your agent at most, usually once every other week, and you're going to have to do a few things a month, right? With drug treatment court, you're coming to court every week, and you're seeing me. You're seeing your case manager every week. You're seeing your treatment provider usually every week. You're doing a group as well as individual sessions. You're required to do an AA or NA meeting 3 times a week. You're required to either do 20 hours of community service every week or work full-time, or at least work 20 hours a week. So there are so many requirements, and so often the participant about a month into the program will be like, this is too much. I can't do all this. How do you expect me? Because remember, these are people who, when they start, they can't hold down a job. They don't even know how to interview for a job, right? So all of a sudden, they have these expectations of having to get out of bed by 8. We have one participant who's like not getting out of bed, right? One of the requirements is he has to get out of bed every day, and 8:30 he's got to take a selfie somewhere in the city of Wausau and timestamp, yeah, I got out of bed and I'm doing something. And the other thing they have to do, I guess, is they have to drug test. And when they start the program, they generally drug test every day. They have to go to Attic Correctional Services. They have to give a drug sample or urine and or oral swab every day. So again, there are lots of requirements. So people who are talking in jail, they don't know what they're talking about, number one, or they're probably lying. And with regard to people who work in the jail, I certainly respect the job they do. You need to pay them more money. That much I know, because I've spent enough time in jail to know how difficult it is. And they, I'm sure, see people coming back and coming back and coming back. But I guess I would just caution you to understand they don't necessarily know what drug court is doing, how many chances they're giving, and what kind of chances they're being given. With regard to the number of chances, though, what I will also say, and this is something I kicked back on at the beginning, and I thought this was insane, but a treatment provider will tell you that relapse is expected. It's part of recovery. Nobody recovers without relapse. And to us who've never been addicted, that's insanity. Just say no. It doesn't seem that hard to me, right? You just say no. You don't do it. But based, what I've learned is the chemicals of the brain, that just doesn't happen. And they do tend to relapse. So I will admit they get several chances. Do they get chances if they're out selling drugs? No. Do they get chances if they just relapse and they're using drugs? Yes. So if they're out there committing crimes, certainly we have a process to terminate them from drug court, and then they're likely going to prison. But if they're just out using, they do get multiple chances. That much is true. Yes.
So what is the number of people that come in with drug offenses or using drugs? What is the percentage of inmates that actually get drug court versus the broad spectrum?
Sure. What I can tell you is that over the course of drug court, we've had approximately 400 applications to get into drug court, and 25% of those applicants have actually got into drug court. So it's not the easiest thing to get into drug court, because first you have to go through some validated assessment tools. So our case manager does, I think we're doing the LSR 1, or I'm not sure, it's kind of treatment talk, but they do a validated assessment tool to, number one, diagnose whether or not they have a substance use disorder that is impacting their ability to engage in social economic functioning in the world. So it has to be they have to have really high needs. They have to score really highly on the substance abuse assessments to say that, quite frankly, they can't function without this treatment. And they also have to be high risk. They can't be first-time offenders. They have to have been in the system, and tried other avenues, and they have not been successful. When we started out the court, our goal really was to treat people who would otherwise be going to prison. So these are people who have been on probation, they've failed, they may have, many of ours, I don't know about most, but many of them have already been to prison once in their lives. And maybe they've done the substance use disorder program in prison, they've gotten out and they've reused. So these are the people who really have high criminality, who have high needs, high risk that we're dealing with. And that's why our numbers when it comes to graduation are not going to be perfect either, because these are really difficult people to try and treat, but that's also why they get so many chances, so that we can try again. They get a lot of chances if they're using, not necessarily engaging in criminal conduct. So to answer your question, about 25% of applicants actually get into drug court, and then you also have judicial discretion. There can be a recommendation for drug court sentence, and a judge, can say, I don't think for whatever reason they're appropriate, and I'm not going to give them drug court. So it's also a misnomer that you can just get into drug court if you raise your hand and say, I want to do drug court. That's not how it works.
Other questions? District Attorney Whetstone.
Thank you. So, a number of comments were said that I think it's very important that we have some education on these concepts, because this is an educational presentation. Evidence-based practices, what that means is approaches and interventions that research has demonstrated to have effective, measurable outcomes, such as reducing recidivism or improving community safety. I heard Judge O'Neill say that public safety has to be at the forefront. I ask then, why is it that numbers are thrown together before this meeting? Why are we throwing numbers together? Why aren't these numbers calculated as we go along to ensure that what we're doing is enhancing public safety? These numbers should be readily available. These numbers should be vetted. These numbers should be analyzed, not just success, because when you look at a number and you say, okay, these individuals, this is their recidivism rate. Okay, let me back up a little bit to make this in simple terms. These are individuals, we're not talking about probation. This is an alternative to prison. So when we talk about individuals and what they would get if they were on probation and the number of contacts they would have, these are individuals who actually would have been in prison. So the individuals, when they're completing the substance abuse program in prison, which, by the way, is alcohol and drugs. So if you're looking at alcoholics, they have very different characteristics than drug offenders. The substance abuse program has both in it. So when you're looking at the prison program, it has both. So you're looking at a recidivism rate or data that is looking at two populations versus comparing it to the OWI offenders who are generally pro-social. They may take a lot longer to reoffend when back out in the community after their 5th and 6th. So you're comparing different populations. And I appreciate that the caveat was given. One of the things that I was concerned about when we got a data officer is that data then that is put out is presumed to be vetted because we have a data officer. Surely the data comes through the data officer. The data officer made this look nice and put the information together into charts, but did not vet the mechanics or the methodology of the data. So I think that's important to know. So if you have somebody who's recidivating in a drug treatment program, they're in our community. So if they fail the drug, if they're accepted into the program and they get terminated, where are those numbers versus the people who make it through the program and also commit offenses? So if we're only looking at the people who successfully complete the program, we're not looking at the people who have reoffended while in the program and the effect on public safety. We're just looking at the people who successfully complete and how do they do. The substance abuse program, people in prison may not complete the program for a number of reasons. Maybe the program, they weren't in prison long enough to complete it. Maybe the program wasn't functioning well at that time. There could be a number of different reasons, but one of them is not they committed a new crime in our community. So when we're comparing recidivism rates, I think it's really important. I can't believe we just had a whole presentation, I'm upset now, that the law changed with OWI court in 2020, February of 2020. How many participants do we have right now? 2. There was money earmarked by this county board for OWI court. We have 2 participants. Not once was that mentioned in this data. As an elected official who sat and just had my budget meeting where I had to go through every line item of my budget and talk about mandated services that we supply for victims, and I could bring stories about victims who have been served by our office, to not hear that there are 2 people in that program. 4.5 years ago, the law changed. 5th and 6th can no longer be in that program. So now we're left with 4ths. So any data that we have now since 2020 for people accepted in that program are going to be lower risk offenders. So, you got to be careful about data, right? But if this is a priority, if this is so important, if people are coming up to talk to people about drug court, I'm not sure what those community members know about drug court. But first of all, we're commingling drug court and OWI court. Different funds, different programs, different populations. But if it's a priority, why for 4.5 years have we not redeveloped that program to provide that service in our community? I've had a meeting that I've been involved in since March about that program. I don't know how much funds, how much is left of funding in that program for OWI court, but I know there's 2 participants. Our office is not anti-treatment court. We were involved in the inception of that court. We are responsible for the public safety voice in that court. We have raised concerns in those courts. One of the concerns relates to monitoring of the court. There should have been a sheet that you could pull out that would have the rates of recidivism or participants or whatever you need. As a population, we should be able to, our community should be able to pull that information out at any point in time and see what is this court doing? How are we doing? Who are we serving? How is it going? What's the recidivism rate? Who are we letting in? So I'm not quite sure. Well, I know it hasn't been a priority because I've been asking for 4.5 years for OWI court to be revamped, and it hasn't. So we have all these statistics here about OWI court, and it's presented about all the good things up to 2019. The law changed in 2020, and I understand that the Department of Corrections hasn't gathered any data or provided data. I shouldn't say gathered any, hasn't provided data past 2019, so I get that. They didn't have the data points for that. But what are we doing here in Marathon County to measure what impact we are having on these offenders? So if public safety is at the forefront, then I'm concerned about the fact that the concerns the district attorney's office has have not been addressed. I'll talk to you about judicial scrutiny. The judges have discretion. We sat in court, and one of my prosecutors sat in court and listened to a tirade from one of the judges who never even talked to me about why I pulled out of drug court, and it's on the record and it's in a transcript, and he talks about how he's inclined, once they're accepted, to let them in. If they have that acceptance form in the file, to let them in. Never talked to me about my concerns about drug court. It's so concerning to me that these programs, which are put out there as such a priority, that I don't see it. I don't see it day to day that it's a priority to infuse public safety into these programs. I don't see, as the district attorney, that these are regularly evaluated. I mean, did you all know there were 2 participants in OWI court? I don't know what happened to that budget. And I have made a decision as a district attorney that I will not go back into drug court. And I made that decision because it was clear to me that things are not going to change because the personnel is fixed where they're at. We're going to end up right back to where we were in 6 months from now. And until there is some true oversight, until there is some true change, some clear expectations, I, at least during my term, will not be back in. So I waited and I waited, and I'm sorry that I'm upset, but I waited and waited, and the fact that that whole presentation went on, and you were all entitled to an update in July of 2024, according to the budget message about OWI court, and the fact that it was not mentioned that there is no plan for OWI court, that there is no future policy procedure for OWI court, and that there are only 2 participants in it was not mentioned, it bothers me. And I can say that as an elected official and as a taxpayer in this county, it bothers me. So I will answer any questions that you have, but I do have a lot of concerns about this data that was presented, and it was presented for a reason, for you all to have education. I think it's very important that this data be accurate and that it really put forth helpful information for this group to make decisions. And I could talk to you about what I see on this data, but I think I made my point, so thank you.
Questions from the committee members?
I
Supervisor,
address some of Attorney Whetstone's concerns.
I don't want to get, this is the one time, Judge,
Oh,
I get
I
the
know.
opportunity to say I don't want to get in a back and forth argument, but
I don't.
yes.
The only thing I just want to address is that the data is annually reported to the Department of Justice in Wisconsin. Those numbers are reported, though, in the spring. I did not have access to those numbers. So there are still some numbers that are reported annually to DOJ.
Thank you, Judge. Supervisor Sandelsky.
I was just wondering if we could get a update just for Marathon County as far as the rearrest rates from from 2019 up to 20 to present, 2024. If we could get data from the OWI court and one from the drug court also, as far as data.
Yes, and I'll have to defer to Judge O'Neill on that when that data might be available so that we could get that.
I think we could have it by next month. So I'm sorry, could you specifically, which one, what do you want?
Like this 30 arrest?
That for drug court specifically?
For drug court and OWI, get a separate one for each one.
Sure.
And just the one, I just want the one from Marathon County as far as like the way you did this with the percentage.
Okay.
Just from like the 2019 up to 2024. Yeah, I mean, if you can't get that data from the comparison, maybe just get the data.
I'm not a data person necessarily, but
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Hoppe?
I have a lot of experience in this field, and it's never talked about having a sponsor, and sponsors are the key to sobriety. You have to realize that when these people are done with this court situation, they have to face the real world, and the sponsor is going to be the one to help them through acclimating to the real world. And you talk about relapse. A relapse is not part of sobriety. I know hundreds of people that have never relapsed and are sober a very, very long time. It's a decision they make. 3 meetings a week just isn't enough for a new alcoholic into recovery. It is just not. And if you start your sobriety in AA, they will tell you every day, every single day, because it has to be in your heart that this is the most important thing in your life is sobriety, and it has to be the number one thing. It has to come before your family. It has to come before your job. There are AA meetings all morning, afternoon, night in Wausau. There's no reason people can't get to a meeting every single day if they're not locked up. None. And those are very, very high priorities for continuous sobriety. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Supervisor Wilhelm?
The money being allocated to the OWI court, I know we have a data entry specialist, but where does the other money go? Because there must have been an allocation for so many people, and then.
Sure, I can bring you back where we are budget to actual, excuse me, for the drug court program. I would just say the difference between the two right now is that drug court is partially grant funded. OWI court or the alcohol court or as DA Whetstone said, the thing that has 2 people in it is not. That's entirely tax levy funded. I will say, however, the services that are afforded under the programs are relatively similar. So the idea that their budgets are 2 stark different things I don't think is accurate. For example, housing is one component of each of the programs that the county pays for individuals within the program for at least, Judge O'Neill can clarify, my knowledge is very limited, but they get some time where housing can be afforded if they need it. There are times where, hey, we have a budget line where the OWI court budget is paying for housing, but it's a drug court participant that stays there. But the short answer to your question, I can come back with the specific funds. I think it's important also to note, as is the case with all of your, shouldn't say all of your programs, but with the vast majority of the county's programs that are funded, any amounts that are not expended for whether it's staffing or program supplies within any individual department would roll over, absent them being grant funds. So all that said, I think I'll certainly show up with, we'll do a budget to actual with respect to I take it from your question, it's both courts or just the OW?
Yeah, you can do it both courts. Both courts, Philly. One more question. When I was told about drug court initially when we were here, it was brought to our attention that it had a lot to do with putting children in foster care, where the children were going to be, and it really hasn't been mentioned at all in the last, 3 years? I know when I first came, that's when I heard about it was going to keep people with their kids, and we weren't going to have to pay the foster care. And I haven't really heard anything about that. Is that still a goal, or is that not happening? Is it happening?
So that does remain a priority. Families would come first. Our maximum capacity is 25 participants, and we've hovered around 24. We've never gone over like to the 20. Years ago we had a waiting list. If we have a waiting list, then the families would go on top of the waiting list. But if there's room in our program and an individual, a participant is eligible based on high risk, high need, and there's a spot, we'll take the individual regardless of families. But if there's ever, we got to choose between the person who has the family or the person that doesn't, we would choose the person with the family. But because we've had the availability, we've been able to take individuals without children. But that still remains one of our focuses. And we still have several, if not most of our participants do have families. And I had the numbers last fall with regard to how many children have remained in their family based upon the recovery court participation, but I don't have those numbers today. We can try and pull those up too. But yes, that's still part of the focus.
Any other comments or questions? Supervisor Marash?
Thank you, Chair. I have several. One of my first questions was going to be how many participants are currently in the OWI court, because I remember last time we had 3 and now we have 2. So with that being completely tax levy, that does not seem to be a good use of funds. So if there were any discussion to revamp that program, has there been any discussion to revamp that program? And if so, what does that look like? And how would those funds be allocated?
So there have been meetings with regard to how to revamp that program, and we've had several ideas that have been floated around as to how to utilize that funding. The number one idea was an alcohol court, but through discussions, it didn't look like we had an agreement as to our target population. When I say agreement, we have to, basically the leaders of the criminal justice system here in the county get together and we talk about who we would want to target as a population. So we need really buy-in from all the leadership, and we just couldn't get buy-in from everybody on an alcohol court. So then we moved on. We considered a family court. We've considered a deferred judgment of conviction type of a court, where you would enter a plea to a felony and ultimately do the court and get some sort of reduction. So we've discussed that. And we just can't seem to get buy-in from everyone on one idea. So ultimately, I know what I think the judges at least had hoped was, if there is no consensus or agreement for a due target population, that we would basically have the drug recovery court, but break that into 2 courts based upon gender. So the evidence does suggest that participants are most successful if they are in a gender-specific court, so that all the females are together and all the males are together. So we would have 2 courts. Basically, it would be one idea, though, it would be drug recovery court, but with 2 separate populations, female and male. You can imagine, you have to be very intimate in drug recovery court. You have to tell lots of personal things. And a lot of times I think for females in that situation, when men are in the court, it's uncomfortable. We've also come across victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, who are in our courts, and it's hard for them obviously to open up in front of men. And lastly, what I will say is, on 2 occasions we've had a male and a female participant get together, and that does not bode well for treatment at all. So that would be, I think, our last proposal. If we can't define a new population, our recommendation would be that we would really have a drug recovery court program and then basically a gender-specific court.
I just want to comment. I want to keep this discussion going, but maybe for about another 5 to 10, because we have one other topic and we've been ticking on. So go ahead, Stacy.
Okay, thanks. So 25% of the participants don't complete the program. Is there any kind of oversight committee that studies where the programs might be failing and what can be done about that? Or have there been any changes made to improve, or do we just keep it going status quo and hope for the best?
No, we do. We have quarterly meetings, and at every quarterly meeting, we review the successes. What are the graduates? What are they doing now? The terminations, and we review what could we have done differently, and how can we try to modify our program if we made mistakes and to get the best outcome. So we do meet on a quarterly basis to review those cases as well as try to make changes.
Okay, thank you. And then just because of time, I just want to reiterate from last time when I was on this committee that for budget, to have these taken out of the administrator budget so that we can see exactly where the money is being allocated. So that's a request. So I will table the rest for later. Thank you.
Yeah, and I share that. That has been, I'd say, a priority, but we have a new finance director. She's fantastic. We are having our challenges with our financial system, but that is 100% on the list. We're doing a lot of cleanup in the budget meetings that DA Whetstone referenced. A fair amount of our time is really sitting down and saying, hey, how does Workday really need to be set up for our financial system? And I know that's a shortcoming, and I'll do my best. I can't promise that it's going to be part of this budget, but I will try to call it out separately. And then the financial system moving forward, it needs to be separate.
Okay, well, thank you, Judge O'Neill and DA Whetstone and everybody for your questions on this. I was on the county board in the 2020-22 term. I was not on in the following term, and I'm back on now, and this is the third time, at least for me, that I'm hearing this topic come up. And I think the one theme from today is, at least, and this is pertinent for me, I mean, I make database decisions, right? And I think the theme is more data is always good. So I would like this to stay on the committee's radar. I think it should be a recurring item as we get more data, and I do support Supervisor Marash's request that we need to try to bust out the funding too, so that we know precisely, budget to actual, where this is going in each particular court. So that would just be my request. All right. Move on to our last item 7, number 7D, City of Mosinee Police Department, Central Wisconsin Airport response history. This is a request that City of Mosinee law enforcement and staff had to appear before the committee, and I certainly support that, so that they can present just some data and anecdote about some of the frustrations we're having with response at the Central Wisconsin Airport. As you may or may not know, obviously the airport is within the city limits of the City of Mosinee. So the City of Mosinee has been responding to an increasing number of calls to the airport. And there are things that go along with that, as I'll let Chief Grams, the Mosinee Police Chief, discuss. But, it's not just a response. There are TSA mandates for the amount of time we have to respond. We have a limited staff. Paperwork follows up on that. And this is our airport and Portage County's airport. So I'll leave it at that. And I want to invite Chief Grams up to the podium or City Administrator Gates is here. However you folks have decided to take team this presentation. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Mayor Jacobson alluded to, my name is Jeff Gates. I'm the Mosinee City Administrator, and with me this afternoon is Chief of Police Kenneth Grams. I'd like to thank the committee and your esteemed chairman for giving me the opportunity to speak to you regarding our concerns revolving around public safety at the Central Wisconsin Airport. As the mayor alluded to, we have increasing service demand calls at the airport. And a lot of these calls are drug-related as well as mental health-related calls that we're dealing with and that the county deals with each and every day as well as we do. But it's gotten to a point that these service level demands at the airport are too much for our small department. And we're here to educate the committee and, more importantly, ask the committee to advocate for change at the airport. And the chief is going to get into some of the details regarding that. But I think, and as he will allude to, is a lot of these calls aren't just a simple traffic stop. These calls take time, especially if we're dealing with a drug-related or an alcohol-related or a medical call where we have to do wait to transport people, do the paperwork that's involved with that. It's just having a negative impact on our small airport. Also, we want to make sure that everyone understands that, and a lot of people don't know this, did the committee know that the Central Wisconsin Airport's open 24 hours, 7 days a week? 24 hours. So people can go in and out of that terminal. And we deal with situations regarding that. And so there needs to be some sort of a change involved with that. And that's what we're here to, one, educate the committee and ask for your help. And I'll turn it over to Chief Grams to provide you some details of what our department is dealing with. And we'll be happy to answer any questions the committee has, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Gates and Mayor Jacobson. I'd like to set a little foundation to hopefully paint a broad picture. Again, my name's Ken Grams, Chief of Police of Mosinee. I'm in my 42nd year of law enforcement. I was appointed as chief in May of 2021 to the city of Mosinee. Prior to that, my career path was the city of Milwaukee. So I bring those experiences up here. And when I arrived here, just so everybody's clear, our staff is 7 officers and myself. So that's 8 in total. Basically, that's 1 officer per shift with a slight overlap of personnel. Now, that may have been good, let's say 25 years ago, when the type of calls of service in the community, in our nation, in Marathon County were different, but our calls of service are becoming very concerning. Even though I don't know all of you, I know some of you, the DA's office, their personnel, Sheriff Billup, his personnel. I can assure you the common theme that Sheriff Billup and I share is to always try to provide the best level of service to the community in a safe fashion. And equally important for myself, and I know Sheriff Billup, is officer safety. Many of these calls that we respond to in the community and at CWA are 2 or 3 officer person assignments. Whether because of an arrest, a combative person, a homeless situation. While I sat here and listened to many people speak, I heard the common themes of mental health issues, alcoholism, and drug addiction. I can share with you those themes are my same themes that we deal with. And I would say each and every one of those types of assignments, on the majority, are two-person assignments. And when you have one officer responding to these assignments, you're constantly asking for mutual aid. To paint the picture for Mosineen, that normally comes from Kronewetter. Kronewetter is in a similar situation where they are drawing probably from 1 or 2 officers per shift. So as I sat here, even in this afternoon, trying to formulate, to paint a broad picture for you, I look at the entities of public safety. The city of Mosineen, which is a priority for me, as well as the entity of CWA. And I feel a responsibility to provide public service and safety to both entities. Also, I would like to point out that the city of Mosineen has a very large responsibility in that we have a school district of approximately 4,000 students and staff Monday through Friday, coupled with our city population of 4,500. So we're a ballpark figure of 8,000 people Monday through Friday, coupled with the incoming personnel, flights, passengers into CWA. So now I look at CWA as a separate entity that the city of Mosineen is responsible for, yet CWA services not only Mosineen, Marathon County, the state of Wisconsin, and even a broader picture where we have passengers coming into our community from across the nation, and then we have passengers leaving the city of Mosineen going abroad. So it's just not a city of Mosineen issue. It's a Marathon County issue that I'm trying to express that there is a need, that we need additional funding to increase our public safety, because our common theme across the board here, as I've heard, is public safety. To ensure the public safety not only of the city of Mosineen, but also of the people that come in and out of that establishment, that being CWA. Again, our staffing is limited. And when I took office, I made it very clear. I wanted to paint a very clear picture for Mayor Jacobson, Mr. Gates, at my monthly council meetings, where I would detail the type of events occurring in the city of Mosineen, as well as at CWA. And I think it's become very clear to our council in the Mosineen, to Mr. Jacobson and Mr. Gates, that the calls of service that are occurring at CWA quite often can be very serious in nature and require multiple officers. I have data. So with that said, I was tasked with preparing a report starting in 2022, all the way through, I believe, March of 2024. And I don't want to bore you with all the data, but the themes are of people bringing weapons into CWA to try to gain access to flights, forgetting their firearms and their luggage. Subsequently, TSA personnel will call Mosineen Police Department. We then have to go assess that situation. Each and every situation in law enforcement is unique. Also, for drug behavior, we will get, I know it's hard to believe, you can turn it on TV, we get the same type of behavior from airline passengers that you see on TV. Passengers coming into our community that are intoxicated, coming off the flights, having medical emergencies, needing medical assistance. And on that note, Mosineen has for the most part, on second and third shift, a volunteer fire department. Excellent personnel, but they will not be able to respond to CWA on second shift before we get there. We will beat them there. So typically, if there's a medical emergency, that assignment goes out to the dispatcher. They will request medical emergency and police personnel. We have to go. We will beat them there, get involved in the situation. So it's not like in a larger city where you have a fire department that is 24/7, staffed fully, and quite often can beat the police department there. In terms of intoxicated passengers coming off the plane, also quite often we are seeing an increase in passengers coming to the terminal intoxicated, waiting for their flights. Then, in particular, one such case, and I've had multiple, but I sat here, I took a note. We had a case in point where one passenger caused 3 days of work for us. The passenger came to the terminal, was highly intoxicated. TSA and airlines refused to allow him to board. He didn't like that answer. Police were summoned. He ultimately was arrested for disorderly conduct, physically detained, conveyed to the jail. He bailed himself out on his credit card. The next day, he came back to the terminal trying to gain a flight, highly intoxicated again, refused to board the flight per TSA. We were summoned. We had to coordinate efforts to get him to the local Quality Inn to go to day 3. Day 3, he came there with intoxicants. They were sealed. Those were confiscated. He ultimately was allowed to leave. Why I go into detail with that is 3 days where myself and an officer were at TSA for multiple hours dealing with one passenger. Similar type incident. This one was a little more complicated that came to my mind. 2 individuals from Wausau on drugs, also mental health issues. They were dropped off by a friend on a weekend. So let's keep in mind on weekends, even though I work there on the weekends, I'm technically not there. So it's one officer. Case in point is this individual was dropped off, 2 friends dropped off with a pit bull dog. They were en route out of state to a drug rehab center. They came to the airport high. They were doing drugs all night. They were there. One of them passed out with his pit bull dog. Medical personnel were summoned along with the police. We arrived with the assistance of Corona-Weather PD, my one officer, their one officer. For the better part of 5 hours, they dealt with securing that animal, getting one party conveyed to an area hospital, and getting the other high person dealt with. So that was the better part of 5-6 hours. I express my concerns with this because while this is going on, there is no one taking care of my responsibilities in the city of Mosinee. The airport is sucking our resources up. And again, I have to try to balance safety in the city of Mosinee and safety concerns for CWA. I look at CWA as a location that is serving the needs of Mosinee, but also Marathon County and the state of Wisconsin. Yet we are straddled with taking care of the financial responsibilities of providing police service to CWA. As Mr. Gates has indicated, and we have expressed concern to CWA staff that there is no security personnel on site at that location. They are open 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is no security personnel at all. I brought that to their attention. Their security personnel is their 3rd shift maintenance worker. I have had conversation with them, meaning the administration. I said, I think you are opening yourself up for a liability because when this maintenance worker engages with a homeless person that's there and there's a combative fight, I see lawsuit coming from both angles. But yet nothing has changed in my 3.5 years of tenure. Also, to the best of my knowledge, the airport is open 24/7. The gate, there is no flights leaving after midnight. I believe there's normally, in fact, there's limited flights right now. There's maybe 1 or 2 flights in the morning, maybe in the afternoon and in the evening hours. But by 11 p.m., it's my understanding that maintenance is completed with their tasks. So from 11 p.m. to roughly 4 a.m., there's nobody there, but the building is wide open. So that brings me to people coming in there, hiding, secreting weapons, secreting bombs, anything. So, and I bring up bombs because just last night at my council meeting, I expressed 2 areas of concern at CWA, both occurring in August of this year. One of which was on a Saturday morning, 4 a.m. The airport landline received a call from a female with a Brazilian accent. She threatened to blow up the terminal and come and shoot people. We take this serious. So my one officer, along with 2 Corona officers, responded to the complex, checked the inside, located no female. I received the call about 4:30 a.m. from my personnel as to what to do. I contacted Marathon County Sheriff's Department dispatch, asked for a supervisor. We spoke. I reached out to the FBI field office in Milwaukee, and through my coordinated efforts from my home landline, I was able to find out that there was 3 or 4 similar incidents in Oshkosh, Green Bay, Portage County on Friday, the day before, where individuals were targeting hospitals and other complexes similar to CWA in a swatting nature. That investigation is ongoing, but it raises a level of concern. And I think the other incident that was brought to the attention in yesterday's Common Council meeting was a situation in which Mosinee PD quite often is asked to do arrests of individuals from outside jurisdictions where they've developed a suspect and they believe the suspect is trying to flee out of the community, out of the state via airplane. One such individual, we received a call at 8 a.m. in the morning by Wausau PD saying they had a sexual assault suspect that they gained information was going to flee out of Mosinee Airport that morning, wanted us to go arrest him. The backstory on that was that individual was actually an illegal immigrant in June of 2023, came across the Arizona border, was arrested, initially detained, released, went to New York, got an ID card, made his way up to Wausau, met a female, sexually assaulted her. I kind of put the brakes on Wausau's request initially. I said, they're close, come down. We need resources to make this arrest. Between the Marathon County Sheriff's Department, Wausau, and Mosinee, including myself, 6 officers, we located that individual and arrested him in the terminal. I believe he's still sitting in jail on a $500,000 bail. That was a lucky story because Wausau's close by. Many a times we were receiving information and requests from municipalities that are much further away to indicate, can you go there, check for a subject on a welfare check? He fled the residence, we think he's coming there. It all takes time and energy. One other case that comes to my mind, just for specifics, is a domestic. Husband and wife got into it. She's battered. She actually brings her gun from home in an effort to flee get a flight, she's got a gun, she's intoxicated. She got arrested. TSA recovered the weapon. We get summoned to the scene. We end up doing a search warrant for her blood, but that's hours of work. So the message I'm trying to send here is these aren't just simple assignments. And we can even go to the car rental agency that's on site. Should be a simple thing. But quite often you get people renting cars from other locations, committing crimes, dumping the car there, leaving behind illegal drugs, syringes in the car. They do searches of the car. Mosinee Police Department summoned to the scene to correct that. Or, case in point, they rent a car from that agency, go commit a crime in other jurisdictions. One case in point, all the way up to Minnesota, they committed 2 and 3 other offenses along the way. 3 and 4 suspects arrested in Minnesota. And then there's hours and hours and hours of investigation that follow up with that. So, in summation, I'm trying to say that CWA services Mosinee, Marathon County, the whole state, yet we are burdened with the financial responsibilities, and I take this profession seriously, just like Sheriff Billup does, and public service safety is utmost, but equally safe or prioritize why for me is officer safety. I'm not going to have my officers going into this situation that's in a dangerous manner, one person. We can't have that. We've had 3 officers get killed up in northern Wisconsin within the last 2 years. I've had too many times going to officer-related funerals. I don't want anybody to have to go through that. So what I'm asking is to take a step back. Let's look to see where we can get funding, see how we can allocate that funding, whether it's through the City of Mosinee Police Department or the Sheriff's Department. But I just welcome some open discussion on that to continue to have a safe environment in Marathon County. And Mr. Gates, I'll give this back to you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. One point that I did not make, just so that the committee is aware, because I'm sure some of you are thinking about it. Well, what about the Central Wisconsin Airport Board? The chief and I did go to the Central Wisconsin Airport Board in June to talk about the city's concerns. Unfortunately, the airport board did not find it that they were willing to fund it. In fact, unfortunately, we had a Portage County board member say there were piddly calls out at the airport. And I'm sure most of the Sheriff's Department personnel would disagree with a term of piddly call out at the airport for what we have to deal with there. Folks, it's just, this is not what the city signed up for when the airport was built, right? It's not what most of us have signed up for, the way that things are going nowadays with drug-related and mental health-related calls. We need help, and it's a public safety. I know you've got a vision over there to be the healthiest, so I had to point that out, and also the safest. Not meeting that vision right now at the Central Wisconsin Airport. I'm telling you that right flat now. Something needs to change. We need your help. And that's all we're here for, is to work together to try to advocate for change before something does happen. We can't, and please don't take this the wrong way, we can't babysit that facility the way we're doing it right now, because that's what we're doing. We need help. I want to thank you for your time, and the chief and I are happy to answer any questions. I know you were talking about statistics based on some of the other subject items that you had on your agenda earlier. We are more than happy to provide this report. I believe Mr. Leonard is in receipt of that report as well from earlier this year. So.
Okay, thank you, Chief Grams and Administrator Gates, for coming and sharing all that information. Do we have any questions or comments from the committee members? Supervisor Mask.
Thank you. since I live in Mosinee and I can see the airport from my living room window, I had no clue all this was going on. And I know how shorthanded our police department is because on several occasions I've had to call them over the last 33 years. And they have to prioritize what they do. And if this airport is being so irresponsible and not taking care of closing that terminal, it doesn't have to be open 24 hours. It's ridiculous. How many homeless people are in there now? And the point that you brought up about someone putting weapons or bombs in there, that is very real. And people are stupid today. They're stupider today than they ever were when it comes to stuff like that. And truthfully, I would never fly again if hell froze over. But I just wonder why the airport board has not taken some responsibility in doing something about a few of these things to try and eliminate some of it. Even if it meant closing the building, it doesn't need to be open 24 hours. And I thought the airport board had a little bit more balls. I really appreciate your presentation, and it really disturbs me, and it really irritates me because it's not right. It is not right to put that many people into jeopardy because of the behavior of people that are hanging at that place. And I know it's not all overnight. I know it's during the day when people are coming in, like you said, drunk and everything, but it just, I can't believe it.
Thank you very much. To your point with homelessness, and I've seen an increase in that. I think we see that across the board in Marathon County. But we see that because quite often people are conveyed via I-93 or 39 rather, excuse me, and citizens will drop them off at the exits and they have nowhere to go. And then they work their way over to the airport that's open. We've been tasked quite often with responding there after 2 or 3 days and said, well, we've had this individual there for 3 days and he doesn't have funds to get out and we don't know what to do with him. So can you help us now? And it's like, you don't have a plan in place and now you're reaching out to us, and we all know that we have limited areas in Stevens Point and Wausau for group homes or shelters. So quite often, if we're lucky to have a opening, we'll make the conveyance. I'll authorize my officer to make the conveyance for that person to get them situated. But that's an increasing problem, especially in the cold weather months. So thank you for bringing that point up. Yes, sir.
How many calls of service do you, on a monthly average, going to Central Wisconsin Airport?
I don't know if I have that exact data in front of me, but let me help you out. When I put this report together, in 2022, we had 165 for the year. In 2023, we had 171. And again, this report up to 2024, there was 37. When I drafted this report, I identified major calls, a service which would require more than one officer to go to, as I kind of spoke over the last 20 minutes about those type of calls. And in 2022, we had 21 major events, 24 major events. And in 2024, now this was up to March, it was 10 major events. Now, and I just alluded to 2 in August, and I can go back real easy in my monthly reports, and I think the mayor and Mr. Gates would say that probably every month there's at least 1 or 2 events at CWA that draw our service up there.
Yes, Supervisor Hoppe.
I can clearly see the need for you to have additional help. My concern is with future incoming terrorists, and I can see that that is a real threat for our area because of the 2951 interchange and the sex trafficking and everything else. And I would support whatever it takes to get you guys some additional help.
Thank you. And I want to express, because Sheriff Billup is here, I have a great working relationship with Sheriff Billup and the staff, equally with Cronaweather. They're backing us up all the time, and also Mountain Bay Police Department. It's just a daunting task, and I don't have the exact answer, but I think Sheriff Billup would say we need resources to provide the manpower to ensure the safety of the community and equally then the airport. And we need help from the airport too, because I don't understand the logic behind some of their decisions there, to be honest with you.
Well, and I'll just also comment, I mean, it's our facility and it's our service as Marathon County, and as I mentioned, there are requirements via TSA for us to get there in time, and if I've got one officer out in the city of Mosinee in the middle of some other crisis call and we can't get there on time, we have to explain that to TSA and a mountain of paperwork. And that jeopardizes our license to operate that facility. So I don't want this taken for granted. And I completely support the chief's request. And I am here, they're used to calling me the mayor for the last almost 10 years, but I'm here as one, the chair of public safety, two, a Marathon County supervisor, and three, the airport is in my supervisory district. So that's why I support the chief's request. So.
Yeah, I see as being under the county purview. I think we should look into maybe having like a deputy, at least, around the area, or get one if we can get funding through Marathon County and maybe even some through Portage, because that's part of the airport too. They're part of the. I think as far as that goes, you get what I'm getting to. It's a county. The whole premises is under the county purview, so I think it would help as to have some kind of county support in that way.
And this is on today for educational presentation only. I guess my request would be to add as for committee members asked to bring ideas for future discussion, I would ask that staff bring back for the next public safety committee funding options for additional security at Central Wisconsin Airport. Again, whether that's direction to build into the budget a half FTE that we can take back to CWA and say Marathon County stepped up, it's time for Portage County to fund a half FTE, whether it comes out of the airport's budget. I'd like that to come back for discussion and possible action as a future meeting agenda item for October's meeting. Supervisor Mask.
Just one question. How long has the airport been open 24 hours a day?
As long as Chief Grams has been here.
As long as I've been here, going on 4 years, and I think prior to that, Sheriff Billup, I don't know if you have any input on that, but I don't think they've ever closed their doors. And I've kind of queried my seasoned officers of 23, 24 years. That's where I get my education from regarding the community and the airport. So I don't think they've ever closed their doors.
And this is not directed at the Sheriff's Department by any means. I'm here advocating to give the Sheriff's Department more resources because they're stretched thin too. I mean, I completely understand.
This is a conundrum. And the conundrum comes from, we just had Chief Barnes here a couple of meetings back talking about what happens when other communities drop homeless folks off here in the city of Wausau. And what do we do now, because this becomes a dropping point, and whose responsibility is it? And it isn't the sheriff's office. Unfortunately, it falls in the lap of the city police department. The library has countless issues with homeless people or problems at the library. Who solves the library problem? It's the police department. Now, we're happy to come there and be a part of the solution and be a part of that problem solving, but if we're going to put a deputy down there because they are 24/7 and TSA requires a 5-minute response time, I did the math on it, and we're talking about $750,000 a year. So for 100 calls a year, that's not a solution. I think this is great that it's for education, and we all need to take a step back and think about what is the approach going to be. So when I first got hired at the sheriff's office, we talked with my captains, right? My captains would talk about when they had to pull shifts at the airport, and we figured out that that was pre-1986. And so that airport was there and was a county facility, and in 1986, the city of Mosinee annexed it. And when they annexed it, it became the responsibility of the police department. So when that happened, we didn't have the problems we have today. We didn't have TSA telling us, hey, you need to have this many officers, there has to be this kind of response time. We didn't have Homeland Security having a ton of restrictions on what can and can't happen at airports. You didn't have checkpoints. I mean, I remember being a kid and going to the airport, and it was like you just walked in and your whole family walked to the gate with you. You said your goodbyes and everybody walked out. You can't do that anymore. So I think what we have to realize as a community is the times have changed, and we have to understand how best to provide the service in Mosinee. We need to put it back in context. We're talking about 100 calls a year, a quarter of which, not even maybe a quarter of which, are what you've classified as significant calls. So we're talking about 20 calls a year. How are we best going to meet the needs of those 20 calls a year without breaking the bank? Because we can't afford $750,000 in order to staff someone down there to do what? So I think creative ideas about working with the partners, working with the airport board, working with Portage County is the way to approach it. And I think a partnership with the city of Mosinee is the right way to approach it. What that looks like, I mean, we've done it with the city of Wausau with crisis, right? We've got deputies that work with crisis, but putting a deputy there for 8 hours when the calls are going to come in when the deputy's not there and you're going anyhow doesn't solve it. So we need to think about what that's going to look like and maybe put some heads together about what a solution is as opposed to just throwing money at something. That's my suggestion.
Well, and what I would ask for then is we need an SOP on this. Like, we really do, a standard operating procedure on how we're going to address the calls. I mean, we've done it with the airport on utilities and how we're addressing utilities that run under the airport, because there's been confusion on that. I mean, this is obviously a different animal, but I mean, we do have to find a way to put this down in writing and have some plan going forward, you know, and if it's not funding, we got to have a better plan of attack. I mean, that's all we're asking for. I think that's all the city is asking for. So, and I will say, I mean, my only other comment is when it does come to funding, I just get aggravated a bit because today we're here coming on 3 hours, and you know, we do have city staff here with a ton of statistics and data on what they've had to do. And then we've got OWI Court we don't have statistics for from 4 years ago, and we keep pumping money into that. It blows my mind.
One quick question. Since tomorrow's 9/11, it came to mind, after 9/11, TSA dropped a bomb on all airports, and security became such an important thing. So I guess I wonder why, since this isn't O'Hare or Milwaukee or Appleton, why it has to be open all the time and subject to things that can be critical with terrorism, with, you know, homeless people in a small hub like this little airport.
And that's thank you. I mean, and that's a place to start. I mean, how many problems could we eliminate by simply locking the door? I mean, you know, Chief, how many of these calls come in after flights are done for the night?
I think once they land, but we also deal with the car rental, the returns. That, you know, that's kind of an entity in itself, because we're getting people dropping off cars, suspects that are committing crimes, doing drugs in those cars. They search the car, or the enterprise car rental cleans the car, recovers the drugs. It takes time to do that. It takes that one officer away from it. So again, it's just not the world we live in, as Sheriff Billup indicated. And as going back to your point, Mayor, that with TSA and the 15-minute arrival time. When I first arrived, we had a situation where our officer arrived, I think it was 18 minutes. And the next day I'm getting a call from the airport, yep, I got to do a report why my officer was late. Well, I sat down with the administration and expressed to them, just because you call and expect the squad to be there immediately doesn't make it possible. And I expressed that officer could be on arrest, up at the sheriff's department booking in a prisoner, on a traffic accident. Totally impossible for us to get there. So I laid down a protocol that if my officer is requested, he immediately advises the dispatcher, and the dispatcher then is going to request mutual aid from Kronewetter or the sheriff's department to respond. But I told CWA personnel, that's not going to meet in the 15-minute interval. I guarantee you they're not going to get there in 15 minutes. So it'll be a TSA violation in itself. So quite often they just have the mindset, well, I'm going to pick up the phone, call 911, and problem solved. That's not always necessary and the case in point.
Well, we've been going on quite a while today, and I want to thank the chief and Mr. Gates for coming and presenting. And I guess my request then, at least, is again that perhaps next meeting we come back with some sort of update on plans that we can provide a safer environment at CWA. And if that means it's directives to the airport board, from this committee, I'm happy to take those back. Unfortunately, I was not at the meeting that the chief and Jeff presented at the airport board. But again, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here that, you know, between the sheriff's department and the city that we can come up with ways to increase safety out there. Locking the door is a perfect example to maybe eliminate a number of problems. But I guess I just would like to see that so that we can try and keep resources, you know, elsewhere, and also keep the airport safe at the same time. Okay, we'll move on to item 8. Next meeting date and time, announcements and future agenda items. Item A, committee members asked to bring ideas for future discussion. I've just sort of itemized what I'd like to see, that this be a continued discussion between Sheriff's Department and City of Mosinee to come up with something for us, just as, even if it's just education on policy changes that we can take back to the airport board to increase safety at CWA. I know budget to actual numbers on the 2 treatment courts that Supervisor Wilhelm asked about, and also either Judge O'Neill or somebody else, if it's the data person, could provide us any updated statistics they have on success, recidivism, et cetera, through the treatment courts, so that committee members are educated at budget time. Anything else I'm missing? Okay. Next meeting date, Tuesday, October 8th, 1:30. Thank you all. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mask, second by Wilhelm. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't.